guess where I'm from? I'm from Panama. And I know the tribulations that Panama went through. In fact, a little secret. I think it was in 1821 or somewhere around there. Panama, I believe, got its independence from Spain. So it was an independent country for a while. And then it joined Gran Colombia, which was a conglomerate of different South American countries. And it eventually became a part of Colombia, the actual country Colombia. And while there was Colombia, they were building this canal. The French was building the canal. De Lesseps was, I think, the guy sort of in charge. And they failed miserably. Why did they fail? Because building a sea level canal in Panama is not like building a sea level canal that this company did in the deserts in Saudi Arabia, where they built the Suez Canal, right? They just had to dig sand and open it up, and sea level between the Mediterranean and the Mediterranean Red Sea, I believe. But anyhow, well, America wanted to build a canal, and Colombia said, "No, señor, no vas a construir un canal aquí. You're not going to build a canal here." So they got a few rebels in the province of Panama, which was a part of Colombia, and I don't remember the president, I think it was Roosevelt, put a battleship in front of my city called Colon, right? And said, okay, you are now an independent country, and we are going to sign a treaty of which no Panamanian signed. Of course, it was Bonavaria, the person who signed the. I'm taking this off the top of my head from my elementary school, so if I get a few little things wrong, it'll just be a few tiny things wrong. But Bonavaria signs the treaty, the Panama United States Treaty for the Panama Canal, where it granted. I don't understand the language. It said 99 years in perpetuity. America got to get the canal, build this canal, and on both sides have 5 miles on either sides of the canal that they control. They ran the canal zone as an apartheid state. I kid you not. The canal zone was an apartheid state within the state of Panama. But I tell you, no matter what, of course, Americans are there. Standard of living is higher. So Panamanians flock to work for the American governments, of which my dad was one of them as well. You know, it's like, hey, if you're working for Pan Canal, the Panama Canal Company, right, you make quite a bit more money and, you know, all that good stuff. But still, the Panamanians living on the canal zone, they lived in substandard housing. We lived in substandard housing on the canal zone. So a lot of folks that lived on the canal zone, Panamanians that is, they also had homes, what we call in the Republic, what means in Panama away from the canal zone, which we did as well. The idea here being that we had America come help the creation of this country, Panama, to build a canal to create an apartheid state within the country of Panama. Now, throughout between 1914 and 1970 something, there were riots upon riots upon riots because, again, we had this apartheid state within Panama. In fact, on the canal zone, the only flag flown for the longest time was the American flag. So here you are. Think about another country coming into Texas, take Austin and say, we are going to hold on to Austin in perpetuity. We're going to have a police force, a fire force, a judicial system. And not only that, we're going to prevent Texans, born Texans, from being able to go into the canals, into Austin. If we don't allow them into Austin, unless by permission, unless they work there, etc. An apartheid state within Texas. That's how it was in Panama. Let me tell you a few truths, however. Like I said, we lived on the canal zone. And as a Panamanian living on the canal zone, I didn't realize a whole lot of this. I know that the Panamanians lived in one section while the Americans lived in better homes and they had better things, etc. But the schools that we had, while they were made of wood, right? And their schools, all of it was made of concrete. You know, that's the standard building procedures. Our teachers, most of them Panamanian West Indians, were exceptional. And we fought and we fought and we fought to get equal rights on the Canal Zone. And I remember my class was the first class on the Canal Zone to graduate from the unified Canal Zone schools. In other words, we had an apartheid school system too. The Panamanians went to one school system. The Americans went to another school system. We got substandard books, substandard everything, except our teachers were excellent. And on the American side, they had the tools, the microscopes, and all these great things. And we wanted those things too. We worked for the Canal Zone. And we finally got it. My class, again, was the first full class to graduate out of that. And let me just tell you, I remember our teachers on the Canal Zone, the Panamanian teachers, grilled us and told us that we had to be an example because the reasons these folks, I remember them telling us, don't want us there is they think we can't compete. They think we are substandard. They think we speak funny. They think that we cannot do X, Y, and Z. And our first class in Cristobal High School, and the Panamanians came out with the first 14, I think it was the first 12 or 14 physicians. I don't remember exactly. This wasn't because the Panamanians were smarter. This was because the Panamanians had to be prepared and had something that they had to prove because they were treated as less than the other. That's what happened. They were treated that way. I want to break off from this little commentary a bit and say one thing. When you see somebody like Tiger Woods excel, when you see somebody like the NBA players excel, etc., 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 and you have what I called those who would want to say there's something genetic of these performances, etc. You know what made those performances? It's amazing the things that racism and prejudice can do because you have to work twice as hard than the majority population. It turns out naturally that you have to excel. But going back to, so I mean, I want people to get that in the head. What we don't generally have is an even playing field. We have a skewed playing field. And anytime we try to unskew that playing field, whether we use things like DEI or other things to say, let's correct the injustices of the past, something always rears its head to get rid of that necessity, that reality. Now we come back to Panama. In 1964, we had these big riots. 1964. Then my old man worked for the the American Fire Department on the Canal Zone, but he lived in Colon. Okay, that meaning you cross over into the Canal Zone to work. When you're done working, you go back to live in Panama, in the city, in the country proper. And when they had the big riots in 1964, my father participated in hosing people out to prevent them from really invading the Canal Zone because it was going to be bloodshed in the Canal Zone. And he was part of the Panamanian groups in the fire department that actually helped maintain the peace. But that also put a bullseye on a lot of these guys because a lot of these guys were told, don't come back to Colon because in effect, you hosed us down to protect the peace. And that is the only way certain particular groups of folks actually got what they called quarters. I mean, it's amazing how they did this to live on the Canal Zone. So there's a whole lot of history in this little apartheid state created by the United States in Panama, and that bears mentioning. To solve this problem, Omar Torrijos Herrera, the person that the American government loves to call the dictator of Panama. By the way, before Omar Herrera, we had plutocrat after plutocrat, oligarch after oligarch, some rich oligarchs that, Panamanians they were. We used to call them Rabi Blancos, that controlled all the sources of production in the country. Everybody else lived the substandard lives. These guys, the president of the country, each time that got elected, Arnulfo and all these other guys, they were sanctioned by the not sanctioned, but, that's who the United States wanted as government. Finally, in 1970 something, I don't remember, like 76 or so, the overthrow occurred. The dictator Manuel Noriega, Omar Torrijos Herrera, took over the country and forced a treaty. Things were just getting out of hand, so forced a treaty that turned over the canal and the canal zone back to Panama to have full control, a sovereign state. Carter signed that treaty. It was called, I think, the Torrijos-Carter Treaty, that gave the canal to Panama and the corresponding military bases, because America built 14 military bases in Panama, as well as some other entities, the Gargas Hospital and these other things. I want to give you a little corollary here. America has a small, tiny base in Italy, and they were paying tens of millions of dollars for that base in Italy. They had multiply 10 miles by 50. They had approximately 500 square miles of a apartheid state they created in Panama. And for that, they gave Panama something like, I don't remember the number, don't quote me, but it's somewhere between 1.5 and 13 million bucks to rent, right? For that apartheid state, that's what they paid America every year. Paid Panama every year. Panama made nothing from the billions that's been made passing ships through the canal to save them from going through the southern tip of South America. They got very little. They got that too. But places like Italy and France, the spaces that America rent, they give away hundreds of millions of dollars. So that is the disrespect with which Panama has always been treated by the American government. Actually, it was an American corporation created by the American government to run the canal that had its own private apartheid government. Again, I have to admit, while I lived down there in Panama on the canal zone, I never was educated in politics to understand the political dynamics. You just existed. You understood this is how things work. And it wasn't, as far as you're concerned, it's neither bad or good. It's just the way it is. It's just as I matured, became older, a lot of things I would kind of hear my father say, I understood it now in a different light. And it's a shame that I didn't understand a lot of this till I moved to the United States, right? But I understood it. So after December 31st, 1999, big day in Panama. At that point, all of Panama became a sovereign country. No more apartheid state in the center of Panama. And by the way, again, that apartheid state occupied the center of Panama for its entire 50-mile diameter, not diameter, but, a punto to cross from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. There's a whole 10-mile gap that Panamanians have to cross if they want to go from one side of Panama to the other. Like I said, a lot of times you don't understand the predicament you're in until you look at it from the outside. Now we come to today. There are a lot of issues with the canal right now. We have climate change. Panama has a big rainforest that normally collects all the water from the rain season, and they throw it into two big lakes, Gatun Lake and Madden Lake. And these lakes have been running pretty low because, again, climate change has brought less rain during the rainy season to Panama. And because of the way the canal functions, the canal is a very ingenious level of engineering, because what it does is it creates a huge lake in the middle of the country, and it uses locks to pull water, bring the ships up to the lake level. The ship goes across the lake in the middle of Panama where it's mountainous. So they use big valleys in the lake. They fill big valleys up with lakes, Gatun Lake. And they only had to dig a trench 8 miles long called the Culebra Cut. Used to be called Gaylord Cut, now Culebra Cut. And they cut through mountains for only 8 miles, whereas otherwise they would have had to cut 30, 40 miles of mountains if it weren't for bringing the ship up to the top of the mountain in that lake and move across. Now, after they did that, again, we have problems with rain last year and for the last several years. So if you believe like America believe in, I don't, but America believes in this thing called capitalism. I call it as the biggest theft really on the labor and resources of the world. And I think that is easily proven if you want to be honest about it. But that's what America believes, and that's a standard of the Western world, including Panama. Now we have a shortage of water to pass the ships through the canal in high numbers. So what happens when there are shortages? Whenever there are shortages, the price of the commodity or the price of the service goes up. So less ships can pass through the canal while we had water problems. Because again, the lakes are not peak full, etc. So you can only pass X amount of ships now. So the prices naturally go up for the lesser amount of ships that can have access to this Panama Canal. Trump doesn't like that. Trump wants all other countries to disregard what America asks of its own. Trump wants the other countries to simply absorb the cost that America would never absorb. And because the rates to pass through the canal has gone up while this shortage occurs, and because it is likely to go up the next year because of inflation, and to mitigate and to create other resources to maybe not have this water shortage as bad the next time around, Donald Trump is threatening to go into Panama and take back the canal. That's what he says. Take back the canal. In other words, disregard the treaty. Disregard the Torrijos-Carter Treaty that returned the land and the canal to Panama. I mean, this brings back memories. We call ourselves a country, a body of laws. That's what we say. We believe in laws. We follow our treaties, all this good stuff. But you know what? When Torrijos-Carter signed that treaty, Panamanians should have always known one thing. Go speak to the Cherokee. Go speak to the Indians about the Black Hill Mountains, or the Black Hills, or the Black Mountain. I don't remember what it's called. As soon as these guys found gold, they got the American military to come in and kick out the natives and take back the land that by treaty they had rights to. I mean, treaty after treaty after treaty, we break. We are the ones who withdrew from the Paris Accords. We are the ones who withdrew from the Iran nuclear treaty. It wasn't the other way around. At some point in time, we are going to have to lead by example at some point in time. But if Mr. Trump, President-elect Trump, think that folks are going to stand by and watch him, as Howard mentioned before, the greatest grifter on the planet, jump into Panama and claim to take back this canal, he has something else in store. Because as opposed to how many of us were back in the 70s, back in the 80s, back in the 90s, where we just let things happen, that will never, ever happen again.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number one, subscribe to our channel. And number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.